Business is coming back to the United States so that they don't have to pay tariffs, and I think also because of November 5th, the election. We don't need them to make our cars, and they make a lot of them.
It turns out about 10% of the cars that we buy here in the U.S. are made in Canada, which is not nothing, but 225,000 vehicles a year shipped.
And that really has been killing Tesla, killing all automakers.
The impact has been extreme. I mean, I'd like to put it in context here. The first Trump administration
It was supposed to be unthinkable. Two of America's most iconic manufacturers, Tesla and Ford, shutting down production lines on U.S. soil and restarting them just across the northern border. Yet that's exactly what has happened, striking at the very heart of America's industrial identity. The Ford Super Duty, long celebrated as the ultimate American truck, is now rolling off assembly lines in Oakville, Ontario. Tesla's next-generation 4680 battery, once billed as the backbone of U.S. clean energy leadership, is being built in Quebec, powered by cheap hydropower and backed by a staggering $1.2 billion in incentives. Back home, the picture couldn't be more different. Once booming plants in Michigan and Ohio now stand eerily silent. Their gates chained, their parking lots empty, for sale signs fluttering where thousands of workers once clocked in each morning. Communities that for generations lived and breathed the hum of American industry are now left staring at hollowed-out buildings, wondering how the unthinkable became reality. And the question that echoes from Detroit to Toledo is unavoidable. How did American cars end up being built in Canada while American workers are left behind? Before we begin, hit that like button. If you're finding this eye-opening, it really helps us beat the algorithm. If the shock of losing production lines to Canada was painful, the numbers behind it are even harder to swallow. Trump's sweeping 25% tariffs were billed as a shield for American workers, but instead, they turned every vehicle into a ticking cost bomb. What was once a competitive edge has now become a crushing liability. Ford projects a staggering $2.5 billion hit in 2025 alone, with nearly $800 million burned in tariffs during just the second quarter. Tesla fared no better. Its balance sheets revealed an additional $300 million in costs for the same period. And within days of Trump's so-called Liberation Day, Tesla's stock value collapsed by 20%. For Wall Street investors, that was a jolt. For Main Street consumers, it was something worse, a signal that buying a new car was about to become an unattainable dream. Industry analysts at Cox Automotive estimate that each US-made car now carries an extra $6,000 in production costs. And economist Arthur Laffer warns that sticker prices could rise by an average of $4,711 across the board, an unbearable squeeze on the very middle-class families these tariffs were supposed to protect. The question writes itself: how long can Americans shoulder this burden before the idea of Made in USA becomes too expensive to believe in? If you've made it this far, you probably care. Consider subscribing to stay updated. While American families were left grappling with higher car prices, Canada saw an opportunity and seized it with both hands. As Washington built walls of tariffs, Ottawa rolled out a red carpet lined with cash incentives and cheap, reliable energy. Ford was offered a $590 million support package in exchange for creating 1-800 jobs in Ontario, a deal that instantly shifted not just machinery, but livelihoods across the border. Tesla went even further, anchoring its future in Quebec with a $1.2 billion incentive package that secured production of its strategic 4680 battery. For Canada, it was more than just a business win. It was the cornerstone of a national industrial revival. The formula was simple, but effective: abundant hydropower that slashes operating costs, a streamlined approval system that avoids endless red tape, and a workforce known for stability rather than strikes. These were advantages the United States could no longer promise. The result was a cruel irony. As plants in Michigan and Ohio fell silent, towns in Ontario and Quebec lit up with new hiring drives. American workers lined up at unemployment offices while Canadian job fairs overflowed with fresh opportunities. But if Canada was celebrating, the mood south of the border was anything but festive. The human cost of the migration quickly boiled over into anger. Tens of thousands of workers in Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana suddenly found themselves out of a job, their towns sliding into crisis as the steady heartbeat of factory life fell silent. For communities built on loyalty to Ford and Tesla, it felt less like an economic shift and more like a betrayal. Consumers, too, were caught in the storm. With prices climbing by thousands of dollars per vehicle, middle-class families abandoned plans for new cars, leaving showrooms across the Midwest eerily empty. For many, the frustration wasn't just about money, it was about pride. Cars had always been a symbol of American strength, and now even that symbol seemed priced out of reach. Politicians from both parties quickly joined the chorus, accusing Trump's tariff strategy of shooting ourselves in the foot. What was meant to restore American industry was in practice hollowing it out. And in a striking public clash, Elon Musk went head-to-head with Trump's advisor Peter Navarro, openly warning that the coming quarters would be nothing short of a difficult era. The outrage at home only underscored a deeper truth. America's supposed advantage had flipped into a disadvantage. Instead of creating jobs, Trump's tariffs transformed the U.S. into what many executives now call an expensive and unstable landscape. Roughly 40 to 50% of the components in an American-made vehicle are sourced from abroad. Under the new regime, those parts are slapped with layer upon layer of tariffs, inflating costs before cars even reach the assembly line. Ford executives warned that the policy left them at a severe disadvantage against rivals like Toyota and Hyundai, whose vehicles benefited from lower tariffs under newer trade agreements. Tesla faced a different but equally devastating blow. By scrapping penalties on companies that exceeded emissions limits, Trump erased the market for carbon credits, a decision that stripped Tesla of an estimated $2.8 billion in revenue. What was once a lucrative edge in the green economy vanished overnight. Across boardrooms, the conclusion became impossible to ignore. Building in America was no longer a patriotic duty or a sound investment. It was the riskiest choice a corporation could make. What began in the auto sector quickly spread far beyond Detroit. The cracks in America's industrial base widened into fault lines that cut through multiple sectors of the economy. Stellantis announced the layoff of 900 workers and suspended operations at several U.S. plants, a move that sent shockwaves across the Midwest. For many, it was the first clear signal that the exodus would not stop with Ford and Tesla, but would ripple through the wider manufacturing landscape. Soon, household names outside the auto industry began adjusting their playbooks. Corporations like Coca-Cola, Heinz Campbell Soup, and even Walmart quietly rerouted portions of their supply chains to Canada. These weren't symbolic gestures, but calculated strategies designed to take advantage of lower production costs and escape the punishing weight of U.S. tariffs on essential materials such as steel and aluminum. By shifting even a fraction of their operations, these companies safeguarded profits while simultaneously weakening America's economic core. The collateral damage was swift and visible. Industrial states that had relied for decades on the gravitational pull of auto plants suddenly saw entire local economies unravel. Retail activity faltered, service businesses struggled to stay afloat, and property markets tumbled as laid-off workers packed up and left in search of new opportunities. Empty storefronts and abandoned homes began appearing in once thriving communities, turning proud industrial towns into cautionary tales. For analysts, the warning lights were flashing red. The collapse of one sector was cascading into others: logistics, food distribution, housing, even finance. This wasn't just an industrial downturn. It was a chain reaction threatening the structural stability of the U.S. economy. Commentators began to describe it not simply as a crisis for the car industry, but as an economic earthquake, one that could permanently shake the foundations of America's prosperity if left unchecked. The exodus of factories was only half the story. Canada didn't just welcome America's production lines, it pushed back with its own arsenal of trade weapons. Ottawa unveiled a series of retaliatory measures that mirrored Washington's tariffs, using the very framework of the USMCA to turn the game into a perfectly symmetrical fight. What was framed in Washington as a unilateral show of strength had suddenly become a contest of equals. Prime Minister Mark Carney left no ambiguity. If the United States leaned on protectionism, Canada would counter with equal intensity, ensuring that Canadian workers would not become collateral damage. This was more than rhetoric. It was a declaration that Ottawa would no longer accept the role of junior partner in North America's economic order. For Washington, the timing was brutal. Domestically, the administration was already fending off anger from unemployed workers and consumers priced out of the car market. The addition of Canada's retaliation meant American exporters now faced barriers abroad, just as their home market was crumbling. The pressure was not just economic, but political, as governors in industrial states demanded relief while business lobbies warned of long-term investment flight. Internationally, the shockwaves were even more profound. Canada's defiance demonstrated to other nations that it was possible to resist Washington without immediate collapse. In Brussels, Berlin, and Tokyo, policymakers began quietly asking whether they too should consider symmetrical measures rather than concessions. What had started as a tariff dispute between neighbors was fast becoming a precedent with global implications. The standoff revealed a deeper irony. The very trade pact meant to cement American leadership the USMCA was now being used as a weapon against it. By exploiting its legal and economic clauses, Canada had not only defended itself, but also exposed the fragility of Washington's strategy. It was a turning point, a moment when America's closest ally showed the world that the rules of the game were no longer dictated unilaterally by the United States. The Tesla-Ford crisis was never just about two companies. It was the first piece of a much larger puzzle, a picture of an industrial superpower quietly unraveling. The withdrawal of American firms served as a stark reminder that protectionism, rather than safeguarding industry, could just as easily dismantle it from within. The label "Made in USA," once synonymous with pride and reliability, was beginning to lose its weight. Even close allies no longer felt bound to stand by it, choosing instead to pursue stability elsewhere. What once represented dominance was now drifting toward irrelevance. The global auto sector reflected this fracture. Prices climbed, supply chains splintered, and markets grew more fragmented by the day. What started as tariffs on steel and cars had spiraled into a worldwide disruption, dragging producers, suppliers, and consumers into the chaos. And so the question lingers over every factory floor and every boardroom: can the United States still claim its place as an industrial leader, or has it already cast itself into the role of outsider? That's the crossroads America now faces. The choices made in Washington are no longer domestic debates, they reverberate across the world, reshaping industries and alliances alike. If protectionism has become the spark for a global chain reaction, where does that chain ultimately end? Thanks for sticking around. If you found this valuable, like and subscribe to support more content like this.